Welcome to the Live.Stock podcast, sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. I'm Bruno Pedreira, Center Director and UT Extension Forage Specialist. And join me today here with Dr. Katie Mason. How are you doing, Dr. Mason?
I'm excited to be here, excited for a new conversation on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, me too, because today we have with us Dr. Bronc Finch, Soil Fertility Extension Specialist with the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture. A guy who's, has been working with forage systems, soil fertility, soil health. Bronc, we had you in Tennessee in the last fall, but we are very happy to have you here in our podcast today. Welcome to the Livestock Podcast.
Thank you, Bruno. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to kick off the conversation with you, and it's going to be all things soil health. But first, we want to know, how you got into your role. So tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to your position now.
Okay. Well, to go way back when, where I'm from is kind of a tricky story, but I grew up in Northeast Oklahoma and in Texas Panhandle. I have livestock background. I grew up on a show stock operation, raising sheep, goats, some pigs, some cattle here and there. Son of an ag teacher, so I really got a very involved livestock background early on, and then when I got into college, I actually moved out to West Texas. Got a bachelor's from West Texas A&M University, actually in agriculture education. Thought I wanted to be an ag teacher, but while I was there, kind of got the opportunity to work on some farms, get a little bit of the crop background. Out in Texas, I worked anything corn, cotton, wheat, really mostly row crop focused. During that, I kind of gained a passion for crop agriculture. So after my attempt at being an ag teacher for a little stint after my bachelor's, I went back, got my master's just in plant soil environmental sciences there from West Texas A&M. Focused mostly on cotton production systems. So looking at different tillage and weed management strategies for dryland cotton production in West Texas. Through that process, I actually worked as a research associate for the District 1 agronomist there for Texas A&M AgriLife, and I got the opportunity to get involved in pretty much everything research that AgriLife had going on in the Texas Panhandle. I really got interested in a silage variety trial that was going on there. And so that kind of opened the door to forages for me. And I got really, with the growing up in livestock, I got interested in the forages as a way to feed livestock and kind of look at agriculture as a whole system. Through those connections, I actually got the opportunity to go to Oklahoma State University and work under Dr. Brian Arnett, Precision Nutrient Management.
Great man.
Working in soil fertility, but also in that forage cropping system. So there I focus mostly on continuous winter wheat grazing systems, looking at both the crop management, but also the nitrogen management of those systems. I got the opportunity to work a little bit with the Noble Foundation while I was there. And then from there, after a short stint as a postdoc, learning a little bit of lab stuff, getting some more extension experience, I got the opportunity to move to Arkansas and actually specialize more in forage nutrient management and forage soil fertility.
And that's exactly the conversation we want to have with you today. And again, as I mentioned, we were very happy to have you there last year when you came to the Tennessee Forage and President Council annual meeting with us. You have been in Arkansas for a while now. What are the main challenges you see? Because Arkansas and Tennessee are right there, right? I think that's the thing I like the most about Tennessee. We can relate a lot with several states that are around us. And from my background in Brazil, I really think that we can learn a lot from the experience that we have. Sometimes, I know that sometimes we don't like, it was done in Arkansas, it was not done in Tennessee, but we have several places that the environment is pretty much the same, and we can learn from each other's experience. So, what are the main challenges you think forest livestock producers are facing today in Arkansas?
So, one thing that I really think a lot of our producers challenges our producers are facing is really older perennial systems that haven't had a whole lot of nutrient management or soil fertility focus from either extension or heavy research, but also, newer systems or transitions from row crop as we see farmland changing hands into new production that goes into hay systems, or maybe even trying to establish some perennial forage systems, maybe have some changes that need to be made or additional nutrient requirements that need to be addressed. And really if we look at it from a soil health perspective, a lot of the Delta crop production and older crop production has been managed as conventional tillage.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see, decreased soil health. As we kind of transition into these forage systems, we have an opportunity to kind of build our soil health back, but we really have to focus on making sure that we can actually establish that crop to be able to, some of those legumes or perennial grasses to really be able to build back that soil health.
Yeah, so mentioning that soil health terminology, there's a lot of kind of buzzwords or new topics that are, what people are focused on at professional meetings and on social media. And so can you talk a little bit about what that soil health really means and what does that encompass and kind of how do you view that from your professional perspective?
So there's a lot of different anecdotal definitions of what soil health is.
That's true.
And if you look up the USDA's definition, it's the ability to sustain an ecosystem. That's really how I look at it. Soil health is just one component in sustaining the whole system. There's a lot that goes into it. It's a lot of soil physical, soil chemical, but also how our cropping and our livestock management really affects the chemistry, the biology that's happening in that soil. A lot of our perennial systems, we kind of have some challenges when it comes to manipulating a lot of cropping systems or manipulating a lot of that soil health quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think long term. Things like our grazing practices, how shallow or far down in the canopy we graze, how much rest time we give that forage. But even in our annual systems, how we incorporate those annuals, whether we're going with a conventional tillage or if we're going no till or limited till, or if we're using mixes including legumes or just a grass, say a sorghum Sudan, how those compositions look and complement one another, but also how they benefit our soil system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in your presentation again, Bronc, I need to refer to that again because I really like the job you did there. You kind of pulled together the idea that soil health is just a component, as you mentioned, and this needs to be coupled in somehow with soil fertility as well, right? We cannot treat those things as two completely separate things that we will accomplish without each other. What's your view on this? Why is that so critical for the long-term forage productivity?
Really, to me, soil fertility, which is my kind of area of focus, that's my bread and butter, if you will, even though I'm still young and I'm still learning. To me, soil fertility is kind of our first step.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked in systems that are, we're trying to build back from where we were. We can't forget about those nutrients that we're removing from that system. We often think, hay production, we understand. We have a lot of nutrient removal, nitrogen, potassium, a little bit of phosphorus, moving every time we remove a bale off the field. But even in our grazing systems, we have to think about how that nutrient cycling within that grazing system, once it goes into that animal, goes into manure, once it's sitting there on the soil, where it goes. When we think about soil health and connecting the two, really they need to complement one another. And I think this is what I hit on quite a bit in my presentation, is how we can use soil fertility to kind of complement what we're trying to do to improve our soil health. So if we think, we're trying to intensify our forage species, implementing an annual or in a mix, there's some specific fertility requirements of those different species or of those mixes that we really have to focus on so we're getting the most out of that forage. So then we get the most for grazing our livestock. And then with that grazing of the livestock, how we're distributing that manure, because that manure, that's going to increase our organic matter, but also allow for a lot of nutrient cycling. So really, they're not
disconnected.
Yeah. Thank you. They're very complementary of one another. Soil health is a lot about nutrient cycling. For soil fertility is making sure we have the nutrients that we need so that we can produce the crop to produce the whatever it is, whether we're going for grain production, or even if we're doing hay or grazing cattle, really wanting to push that crop, we got to use that soil fertility to do that. We got to be conscientious with it when we're managing from a soil health perspective as well.
And I think it's just, I love the way all these things connect. That's why, you have three nerds sitting here talking about grass and cows and soil, because just that nutrient cycle through that whole system is so fascinating. So When we think about this from an applied standpoint or a producer perspective, there's always the basic recommendations, right? The practices that you kind of have to do to make this, a good system for your soil, for your forage, for your cattle or grazing livestock. So what are some of those practices that you just say, this is, this is the one that you have to really focus on, or the few that you really have to focus on?
For benefiting, say, like benefiting soil health with fertility
In
management
forage systems, yeah.
in forage systems. Well, I don't want to overstep. You're the agronomist here, and you're the beef cattle specialist here. But the way I see it from a grazing management system, we really want to focus on how heavily we're grazing. Giving enough rest time, leaving enough forage, so we have essentially that plant material so that we can photosynthesize and keep active roots growing. But from a fertility perspective, we really want to focus on kind of how we're managing those nutrients. A lot of my work is more focused on the hay production because that's where we have a lot of that nutrient cycling and
high removals.
High removals. Sorry, not nutrient cycling, high removal. And in those high removal systems, I really kind of focus on make sure we're putting back what we're removing, but make sure we're putting it back correctly. So when it comes to nitrogen, we don't want to front load a lot of nitrogen. We want to give that crop what it needs because any extra that's out there that crop doesn't use is susceptible to loss. But also from, nitrogen is the big one everybody thinks about. But potassium is going to be that one that kind of hides a little bit. There's a high removal. It's usually taking up more than the nitrogen. And sometimes that might be the first one that a lot of producers think about, cutting out whenever they start budgeting. But we want to make sure we're replacing that because we've seen with some data there in Arkansas that we're seeing major yield losses and stand losses. When you have those stand losses.
On that, I think that some states in the U.S., they have a lot of potassium in the soil, but we are talking about the southeast area. And at least in Tennessee, I haven't found much of the areas that we have a lot of, high concentration potassium in the soil, right? I think that's the same in Arkansas.
Yes, certainly. That's a good point to bring up. In Arkansas, much like you mentioned, we're in soils that are shallow or have been cropped for many years, a lot of hay production without the replacement of potassium results in those low potassium soils. I talked to my neighbor over in Oklahoma. They say they might not be able to get returns on replacement potassium, but they may be at higher potassium soil test levels. So when we're in those lower levels, we want to make sure that we're replacing it. When we're right around that optimum level, if we're cutting hay off of it, we definitely want to make sure that we're at least kind of trying to maintain where we are. Some areas of the country, phosphorus becomes very important. How you manage phosphorus, especially as you go out west. So the potassium thing, it's just based on crop removal. That's a lot of the management there. From the grazing or the pasture side of things, really just making sure that we're getting the fertility out there to cover what we're trying to do. So, we're trying to keep forage, available for grazing as long as possible. Well, if we're supplementing nitrogen throughout the summer, throughout the spring or fall grazing seasons to make sure that crop has that nitrogen that it needs. If you're in a leguminous system or if you have some legumes mixed in, maybe dialing back on your nitrogen. And really one of the biggest challenges that unfortunately in forage systems we're going to be facing always is going to be soil pH. When we think about chemistry, soil fertility, plant physiology, it's all going to be how that soil, what that soil pH is. So we want to make sure that we're managing that, monitoring that regularly through soil sampling is the best way. Really kind of the only way to know what our soil pH is. For me and our hay production systems, I recommend soil sampling every year. A lot of nutrient cycling, a lot of cation removal, affecting nutrients, but also that pH in our grazing systems. If we're in a low pH system, we might want to sample a little more frequently, but at least sample every couple of years, 2 to 3 years, get a sample out of your pastures, know where you're at.
Bronc, great conversation here. And I think you pointed really important scenarios here, right? When we're talking about hay production is one thing. When we're talking about grazing systems are completely different. Nutrient removal, everything is much more aggressive, more, higher numbers when we're talking about hay production, right? When we go into the grazing system, I think we all agree that maybe 80-85% of the nutrients will be cycling there, and somehow everything that comes in, goes out in some way. You already mentioned that grazing management will define a lot and how this distribution will happen there. But every here and there, you find someone saying that, I stopped to fertilize 8 years ago. I have not done this for 12 years now. How do you feel about this? What as a soil fertility specialist, uh, even assuming that the cycling is high for a grazing perspective, what's your feeling when you hear someone say that they have not done anything in the last decade?
So when I hear producers say, they haven't managed their fertility or they haven't soil sample in a long time, a few years, my first recommendation is pull that soil sample. If it's something where producers haven't soil sampled in longer term or haven't managed fertility in longer terms, my question is, what does your production look like, and what are your goals?
Mm-hmm.
If I can convince them to take that soil sample, luckily in the state of Arkansas, soil sampling for taxpayers in Arkansas is free, so
That's
a
great.
little
That's awesome.
easier to convince them. But even still, let's just take that soil sample. Let's take a look at it and see where those levels are. See if something's missing. And then luckily I'm in extension, and one of our biggest things in extension is, showing and demonstrating. So if I get those producers that are, I don't know that I can make that fertility page, especially in our grazing systems. Grazing systems for me as a fertilizer guy, that goes down at the beginning of the year. It might be 2 years before they see a payoff of that input. So I understand it may be hard to see that payoff short term, but let's just take a strip. Let's take a small area. Let's work together and see if we can find something that meets your needs. Let me show you what you're missing. Great thing about being an extension, if your system's working and what I do doesn't change anything, that's great. If what I do does change, I hope I'm able to show that and convince you that maybe
That's our job
should look
at the end of the day.
Yeah. And Bruno, it reminds me of a conversation we've had previously on the podcast about, the long game, right?
Yeah,
and
long
thinking
term,
about these decisions that we want to see that immediate payoff. But if you think about, and I'll use the word sustainability. If you think about these systems sustaining themselves for a long time, we need to be doing that maintenance level stuff. Just even though if we're not seeing that payoff that year, it's going to be down the road, right? So.
Yeah. And another point that I think it's sometimes pops up when we are in this kind of conversation is we will hear from someone that they are not applying anything, but they're mention about mineral fertilizers, right? But you do have a chance to use, poultry litter or older source. I think that's something that we will consider more as we go, as we get into the sustainability. What are your thoughts on those other alternatives that we have on soil fertility that they are not straight in a bag?
Absolutely. Other sources, poultry litter, where coming from out west, beef cattle manure is a big one coming out of feedlots. These other options, effluent from dairies or swine operations, these are good options. In Arkansas, we have a lot of poultry production. We have a lot of chicken litter applied. Most of our manures, just the way it happens, are going to be high in phosphorus. So there's, make sure we don't over apply any nutrients. We want to manage how we're applying those nutrients, especially, you get into, in Arkansas, especially maybe some of Tennessee, there may be, watershed districts where phosphorus may be of a concern, but look at those. Those are good options because not only do they apply fertility, they also apply some organic matter. Increase some opportunity for carbon sequestration, increase some of that the soil physics, going back to the soil health stuff, increase water holding, water movement, nutrient holding capacity, increase that organic matter level. The commercial fertilizer, the fertilizer in the bag, should be used to kind of make up those gaps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we think
Complement whatever you don't have there. Yeah.
if we're having a limit based off of our phosphorus levels, maybe we can use that nitrogen or that potassium really to supplement what we're not able to fully cover with our manures. But I think it's a great opportunity using legumes going in.
Yes.
Interseeding or rotating with leguminous forages is a great way to get both organic matter and nitrogen that can be mineralized and used for subsequent forages as well.
I think legumes is one thing that in Tennessee we learn how to do it, right? We have clovers everywhere.
Yeah, we've got clover, that's for sure. And it also made me think about a question as you were talking about nutrient distribution. A question that I get sometimes about grazing systems is it worth it to drag my pastures, right? If I'm grazing cattle and there's manure piles, should I, drag that so that it spreads out those nutrients? And I know that my opinion is usually if you're, doing a good job with grazing management, probably doesn't require that extra step of going and dragging pastures. But I'm curious from a soil perspective, what you think on that.
So I actually kind of loop this in with my recommendations for hay feeding. I don't recommend on how much or when to feed hay, but I look at it from the back end. When we feed hay, there's going to be leftover organic matter there.
Mm-hmm.
Running that drag to spread the organic matter out. If you're unrolling and you've got a strategy for unrolling, that works great. But if you're using ring feeders, nothing against them. But if we can spread that organic matter out, that's going to have nutrients in it that hay removed from one of your fields or from whoever you bought it from, that you can incorporate as an organic fertilizer. Same thing with the manures. If you've got good manure distribution, you may not need it, but it might not hurt. I mean, I don't know if they've been able to make it to where you can control where the manure goes from it.
It's true.
If they ever do, that would be great. But there's going to be manure depositions more around feeding areas, hay feeding areas, waters. So you can use those pasture drags to just kind of get it moving around in there. And the little bit of scraping, scarring that you get of that soil is going to increase a little bit of that soil and manure or hay contact, which is going to help jumpstart that mineralization process.
Bronc, it's been a pleasure, man. It's really great to have you here on the show with us and learning more about soil fertility and soil management, right? I think in the end of the day, that's why we're always talking here. Kate and I, we're passionate about this thing, is put together the whole big picture of the system, right?
Absolutely.
I think every guest we bring here helps us to understand that we have a lot of boxes that we cannot keep then closed and apart, right? We need to open those tools out of the toolbox and use all of them to make better forage systems. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Good. So thank you, our guys that are have been sticking with us here today. Hope you guys come back next month for our next guest. Thank you all.